This is the G8 Global Sourcing Think Tank session. And, based on the surveys that was done at Orlando, last year at Budapest, it's pretty clear that this session kind of wins the highest marks in terms of engagement, participation, excitement, provocative conversations. It's come back to Europe after doing a full circle around the globe. The G8 session was held in Singapore, in Australia, in Orlando, after it started off in Budapest. And it's really a group of 8 people who are nominated and elected by the participants here as think tank and thought leaders in the industry. And the idea here would be to debate issues, would be to really be provocative, and ask the tough questions. And you have a great panel there that you have elected. And to really host the show, we have a real star, Fiona Bruce, who a lot of you from the UK and others would know, hosts a number of shows. And really, she's going to get as provocative as you've seen in the past with other people. So without any further ado, Fiona.
Well, thank you very much, that one person, wherever you were. That was marvellous. Round of applause. Interesting to hear Tiger saying, I'm going to get as provocative as I have in the past. I thought, I'm not sure what that means, if that's referring to children in need or various outfits. I wasn't entirely sure. I'm very pleased to be here. I think talking about the areas that we were talking about today in terms of shared services and outsourcing is something that's very topical at the moment. I've been talking to friends of mine in industry, a couple of chief executives, just to try and pick their brains about the subject we're going to be discussing today. And then when I looked at the newspaper on the plane up this morning, I was reading about the impact of the $6 billion deficit cuts that George Osborne was detailing yesterday. And there was a market analyst who was talking about outsourcing and was saying that the golden age of outsourcing is to come, that there's going to be a dramatic rise in revenue for outsourcing because the government's going to have to hive off so many of its own services in order to cut its internal costs and get other companies to do them. So it's clearly something that is very much in the air at the moment. It certainly makes sense for us to talk about it today. Now, obviously it's good news for outsourcing, not so good news for some of the consultants perhaps who are going to be up here as well, because I think there's going to be swinging cuts in that area. But, interesting times ahead. These are questions that you have decided on, and this is a panel that you have decided on. So no pressure to our panel, but they better be at the top of their game. And there is time for a question and answer session afterwards. So certainly, if there are things that you are frustrated by, or questions that you feel we haven't answered, or if we've kind of dodged the point, or there's other areas you want to talk about, stick your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. If while we're talking there's some kind of burning area that you feel you absolutely have to say, pitch in, because this is your session. I'm assuming all the questions will be at the end, but if there's something you absolutely want to say there and then, do it, because this is for you. So we're interested to hear what you've got to say. We're also not allowing our panel to advertise their services in any way. This is not a platform for everybody to kind of tout what they do. So it is my job to shut them up if they do. I'm sure they won't. They'll be neutral, and it'll be very informative, and it won't be a problem at all, will it? No. Excellent. Right. Without further ado, let me introduce our panel. Now, let's kick off with Bill Payne from IBM, but if you'd like to come up. Now, Bill, since 2009, has been Vice President of CRM and Industries Infrastructure globally, with about 60,000 staff, leading the development of business strategy and service development for IBM. Next up, we have Cesare Capobianco from Oracle. Cesare, up you come. Now, Cesare is Vice President of On-Demand EMEA, providing Oracle application software on demand. I'm sure you all know all this since you both these people, but I'm going to fill you in anyway. Next up, we have our only woman. I'm thrilled to see her, Karina Smith from Capgemini. Karina, up you come. And Karina is Vice President of Strategic Sales and Development for Global BPO for Capgemini, and you've been in the company for 7 years, Karina. I was saying to Karina earlier, actually, that the reflection of our panel slightly reflects back the general election that we've just been through. Lots of chaps. Not a lot of women. Maybe we'll come on to that at some point, so we'll work that in. Next up, Peter Raspa from SAP. And Peter is globally responsible for the F&A and administrative backbone for SAP, covering F&A purchasing, contract licensing, and facilities management. And in addition, he's Chief Operating Officer of F&A, responsible for all finance-related processes globally. Peter, welcome. Mark Bonus, partner at KPMG. Mark, up you come. And Mark has run the advisory practice in Hungary, or runs the advisory practice in Hungary, rather, been with KPMG for all of his working life, and in Budapest for at least 20 years. Now, that doesn't show a lack of imagination, that shows loyalty, I think. Peter Moller from Deloitte. Peter. And Peter leads the shared service and BPO advisory team for Deloitte in Europe, and since 1990 he's supported over 50 organisations in the area of finance transformation, shared services and BPO. Next up, Tom Bangerman from the Hackett Group. Now, when I was given a little biog of Tom, it said he was named HR Superstar by HRO magazine in 05, 06 and 07. So, Tom, we are glad you've come among us. And Tom is Vice President of Business Transformation. And last but absolutely not least, Peter Brown from Accenture, who is Global Head of HR Outsourcing. Right, okay. Now, as I said, these are the questions that you have voted for, and I've got a little clicker here, which I've never, ever been entrusted with before. Normally hand it to our weather person in news, and they manage it quite well. But let's give it a go and see if it works. Our first question, which may come up at some point. If it doesn't, I'm sure someone can come and fix it for me. We're talking about multifunctionality. And now the question I have here is, does global business services really make sense? If so, then for which companies? Is it not contrary to the organisational setup of some to put all functions and regions together? Now, we, as a panel, I was having a bit of a briefing beforehand, and we were chatting about multifunctional SSOs. And I just wanted to start, I know we've got the lights down, but just to give us an idea here, how many of you out there are considering multifunctional SSOs? Will you put your hand up if you are considering it? Well, perhaps more than we expected. Bill Payne, what does that tell us? I think that's what, a third, a quarter?
Yeah, well, it was me that asked the question as to actually how many people were thinking about doing that. I think one of the things, an observation, it's quite interesting to see that many. I guess the thinking I have is that it's really the top tier of companies, I guess, amongst you, the top half of 1% of major corporations that have advanced far enough to get into that level of thinking. I guess we still see this huge pyramid amorphous mass of companies that some of whom are still looking at shared services, some of whom are still consolidating finance, consolidating HR, and aren't ready for that next big step. So my contention was, is anybody really ready to put all of their services together, and are they looking then at multi-site locations as well, or are they all just going to go big bang? And I threw that across to my consulting colleagues on the panel to tell us what the latest thinking is from the consulting side. From the delivery side, it's doable, but I think it's a balanced risk issue. It's where you find the right skills, in which towers to combine, and then in which locations that you put them.
Peter?
I think from my perspective, I see a lot of organisations who've spent years looking at shared services and global business services, multifunctional shared services. Putting multiple functions into a shared service centre is a logical extension. All of the things that make shared services worthwhile and give a business case benefit work for global business services. You're getting better economies of scale. You know, you're having maybe 3 or 4 locations globally, not 15, 20, which makes sense if you're building a captive. You can have the local IT, HR, finance infrastructure supporting multiple functions in one location rather than 3 or 4 shared service centres, one for HR, one for finance, one for IT. So there are a lot of pros. For talent management, you can actually offer a career path within the shared service centre. The issue is that it's considerably more difficult. You know, if shared services within a single function is like herding cats, trying to do it across multiple functions is like herding cats, sheep, goats and dogs at the same time.
Karina, what's Captain
Yeah, I think we have a slightly different point of view in that we think really HR, the benefit of a shared service is if you get closer to the business. So not only do you take away mundane stuff, but you actually get closer to the business. And as I said before, drive more value. That's really what you're about. And really, HR is not finance. You know, they're completely different animals. They think differently. They have different strategies. So
there will be cross-referencing across the business.
Well,
Isn't
but
that
you're sort of saying a lot of the stuff that they do is humdrum, and okay, maybe yes, but then automate it. You know, so I think really the idea of multifunctional shared services is a little. I'll be provocative. It's a little bit lazy. It's like saying, okay, I'll take advantage of cheap people and I'll chuck them all together in one place. But actually, pretty soon, you think it's suboptimal. That would be my view.
Is there anyone here who's rather more positive about it?
Yeah, I'm pretty positive. I mean, I think I'm not surprised about the numbers because our research actually says that this year we've got more multi-functional shared services than single-functional shared services. So,
and why do you think that is?
Because of many of the reasons that Peter mentioned, but also in addition, remember that one of the main trends is what we call end-to-end processing. So far we've been sort of focusing on small pieces. You know, you take payables, do a small piece of job. But if we really want to get the benefits, we need to take what we call an end-to-end view. And end-to-end is cross-functional by definition. So if I don't have it in one place, then how am I going to do that?
Finance and HR.
I'm sorry?
Where's the end-to-end between finance and
Well,
HR?
like you said, HR was a different animal. But take finance and procurement in PTP, or take OTC between finance and sales and so on. So you've got a lot of end-to-end processing. The other reason that sort of Peter also referred to, when you look at what happens lately, and I think your question was also about which companies, then imagine you have a sort of medium or smaller sized company, and now we would recommend to them that they build per function a shared service center, per region, per business unit. So then you end up having 27 buckets with 5 people each. So what is the business case going to be on that? So it's also simply driven by what makes sense in terms of doing shared services and utilizing this whole model. So the model for smaller companies makes only sense that way.
Tom, there's exactly the point from my point of view, because what is a multi-tower shared service center, and the definition is important. So you might come up with a kind of strategy where you have a framework in place, where you say, okay, we have a co-location piece, we have a layer of HR, of finance, whatever, but then the towers itself, they are independent, because HR is different than finance or pre-sales or whatever. And I think here it depends from the appetite you want to take control, or you get to the business again. And my opinion is, I think you need to balance it. So a pure multi-tower shared service center with high governance and everything out of one hand, I think probably does not work, but the right framework and the governance, I think that's the king's way from my point of view.
I think the point you're making also about critical mass is important, particularly when it comes to attracting and retaining employees. So maybe there is career development, you can move people across functions, but many people, if you're working for a captive, would much prefer to work for an organisation that has 400 people than 200 people, and see make a bigger footprint in the recruitment market as well.
And what about if you're trying to create a corporate culture? I mean, where does multifunctionality come in there?
Well, it's easier if you've got a larger organisation. Your culture would be around the shared service centre, not the corporate that you're working for. If you're an investment bank, you might not have any operations in the location where you're setting up your shared service centre. You've got to start branding that shared service centre in order to attract the people, because they won't have heard of the company.
Size matters, yeah. Size and maturity matters both.
I've been doing some work recently with Shell, and they're probably held out to be one of the organisations that have global business services. Probably Procter & Gamble and Shell are the two most famous and significant ones. And Shell actually have a model where they have the benefits of global shared services, but they don't have the functional disconnect that Karina was talking about. So effectively, they have a shared services leader on a global basis. They have 6 shared service centres. They have the functions in those shared service centres, but the functions report back up through their functional reporting lines, not to shared service leaders locally. So it means that HR still feels part of HR. So now, there are pros and cons. Either way, you're going to have a disconnect. Either the disconnect is between the functions, in which case, in Shell, there's an issue with how they work between finance and HR locally, or you have the disconnect between back office HR and the businesses, or back office finance and the businesses. So
but you
it's
end
always
up with a sort of matrix come matrix come matrix, because then, you know, if you're a business unit selling certain products in certain markets, and you're suddenly facing, not only have you got an HR business partner and a finance business partner, but then you've got a shared service with an HR leader and blimmin' heck, you know, you're sort of talking to so many people, and all you're trying to do is sell your goods and make some drink in Brazil, you know, and suddenly you've got to talk to this massive organisation. So I think there are definitely benefits in terms of control, benefits in terms of the professionalisation of the services, but I think we've got to be careful not to try and put them in a bucket and say that they're the same, because then we'll end up with generic services, which is going backwards rather than forwards.
Karina, I'd agree that we need to be careful. However, the gains, I'd agree with Peter as well, can be huge. And I speak by experience, because not only we've seen a number of customers go through that transitions, especially in the oil and gas industry, but also our company, ourselves, we've gone through that. At the end of the 90s, we had service centers in 68 different countries. Yeah. Now we have one single instance. That's $3 billion on an annual basis of gain. Yeah, $3 billion. Yes, it is a balance, because we also need to be mindful of the different local regulations and languages and all of that. However, you know, we have been able to do something like 60 acquisitions in the meantime, and move profitability up from 14% to 43% in the same period. And again, a lot of that has been driven by, you know, going from 68 different centers to one. Yeah, so I agree with both, but again, there is a lot at stake here. There can be really, really huge improvements.
I think one of the interesting things, that I was fortunate to be on the panel in the US SSOWeek as well, and one of the discussions we had there was we did a little straw poll around how many corporations had a chief services officer. Because I guess the recognition would be, when it's time to bring all this together, you would, in the way you've got a CIO and a CFO, you'd have a CSO. Why would you not have a chief services officer in charge of incorporating all the services, back office or even front office services? And there's only two American corporations that I know of that have actually moved that way, to try to assemble all the services in the same place. And I think that probably would be truly transformational, actually. That would be a true signal that if someone is actually sitting on the board and has point responsibility then to work out how to unmesh it all, if you like, by tower, and then reorganise it, I think that would be a true sign. And that's something that's why I asked the question originally about how many are actually looking at that. Because again...
But Bill, these two companies that have done it in the States, what are they, what do they do, how come it works for them?
They're major global multinationals. They're American corporations housed in America, but they're global multinationals. The reason they've done that is they've done much of the tidy-up work around finance tower, HR tower, some of the CRM business. The procurement's already in with finance. They're ready for this next stage. But the only way they can make it happen if it comes from the board level. Because as all of you will recognise, we all get the intransigence by company, by line of business, the objection, the pushback, everybody's different. And again, Europe is different because it's different languages as well to the Americas. But what they've recognised is the only way they can take the next step is to have a board member responsible for driving that through. And again, I don't know any European companies that have put that in place. I'd be surprised
I think,
if
Bill,
any have.
the reality, I've seen quite a few organisations who say they've got global business services. The reality is the business card says global business services, but it's an organisational veneer at the moment. Beneath it, they have separate functional shared service centres. They're trying to move towards combining them and basically standardising on common platforms, but there's a long way to go.
Peter, what's your view on it all?
Well, I agree with exactly what Bill's just said there around, I think, essentially the governance structure to enable multi-process shared services. I think Karina takes a slight issue with what you said around synergies between F&A and HR. The fact is, I think, bringing functions into a shared services centre, whether that's internally or outsourced, having all that data in one place, having one leader, one budget structure, one recruitment, one training process actually brings great efficiencies anyway. I think it also gives much greater visibility to the board level around the actual value that the traditional support functions are delivering to the business, which I think was your point, which is around if you're going down this route, be really clear about the business value you're trying to achieve. And if that's not clear, then pause and establish it before you go down any of the routes we've discussed today.
I think it's as well a bit about culture. Yeah, so if the corporate culture is very top-down, I think then it's much easier to steer such a multi-tower shared service center. And if it's more persuasive or talkative or whatever, I think then it's much more difficult to survive and shut the tower. That's at least my opinion.
I think there are some sort of economies as well that you can't sort of run away from, and I think Professor Anthony Hesketh is in the audience, and he's written a paper. He talks about triple jump and the difference between triple jump and long jump around how you move to a shared services environment. And so essentially you start by centralising, and then you look to sort of arbitrage or some form of automation, and then you maybe make the choice to externalise. And it's a very good read actually around the different benefits you get by approaching either the triple jump, going stage at a time, or going straight to essentially a third-party provider.
The discussion we've had has been around captives. Does it make sense for a captive to move towards global business services, multifunctional shared services? But you could equally ask the question, if you're outsourcing, does it make sense to go to a multi-tower provider? Or does it make sense to go to 2 or 3 or 4 providers for HR, finance, IT? I don't know if we want to get into that discussion, but there's
well, what's your opinion?
debate.
You asked the question?
Yeah. I asked the question, so I have no idea what the answer is. No, I would say that 5 years ago, a lot of the outsource providers will tell you, multi-tower makes sense. And there are 2 or 3 outsource providers who probably have multi-tower capability.
Is that because of economies of scale, that kind of thing?
Because a single point of contact, single contract, you get critical mass. You could do a deal with maybe 500 heads, which an outsource provider is really interested in, rather than maybe one that only has 60 heads in HR, and the outsource provider may say, well, to be honest, it's not a great deal for us. So the outsource providers really want it. The risk to the client is putting all your eggs in one basket. And secondly, the outsource providers don't tend to be best of breed in each sector. So you'll find some that are very good at F&A, but probably aren't very good at HR and pretty poor at IT. And there are probably only 1 or 2, maybe 3 providers who genuinely have multi-tower capability. So if the client has the procurement capability and the management capability to manage multiple vendors, it's probably making sense still to go multi-tower, to go single tower to different providers rather than one multi-tower deal. That's my view.
I think the interesting thing that's happened with the recession is it's focused people's minds, our customers and board members, focus their minds on really where should they spend the money and what are the structures, if you like, that they can leverage that can make them more agile, because they've seen their sales go down like that and their costs have really crept down and hardly moved. And I think that they've then reflected on, okay, we spent the last 3 or 4 years building up some trust, either with our shared service business or with our outsourcer. Maybe we can now extend. So I think I'm seeing a trend where people are looking at multifunction, but it's more because they've already built a sense of trust. As you say, Peter, the governance is already there. And then I suppose it makes sense, but you've really got to bring in people who understand that domain. You can't say, a generic processing guy is going to understand, recruit to manage or something. It's just not true.
Trust, Karina, for me is a key word here, trust. Is because, especially if you go external, more and more I see our customers looking at question marks in security. Is something that maybe is part of jargon here is multi-tenancy, meaning one single company using the data or running services for multiple companies, and particularly in the EU there is a data privacy question and the regulations around it. These are all topics that are becoming more and more important. So the point of trust, the point of security, the point around data is becoming more and more prevalent. Especially now we are going towards cloud computing is a big concern around, cloud is fantastic, it's great technology, but who is responsible? Who is responsible for security? Who takes responsibility? And there is more and more attention to these topics. And I guess is part of the kind of journey is understanding more deeply, what are the security implications? What are the data implications of that transition?
And what about the question in terms of private versus public sector? I mean, are there different issues here if we're talking about multifunctional shared services in terms of private and public sector?
Do you want me to start off on that one?
Why not?
You know you're going to wind me up. For most of us sitting here who, I guess, spend significant time with both private and public sector, there is still an enormous gulf between the two. The top of the tree in terms of talking about multifunctional and really efficient shared service, whether that's insourced, outsourced, onshore, nearshore, farshore, doesn't matter. The outstanding thinking and implementation execution is no doubt in the private sector. And again, most of us who here are working in the public sector will tell you that while strides have been made, and this isn't just a UK statement, it's a global statement, in many governments there is still a massive amount of inefficiency in public sector. Don't let anybody kid you in any government. And again, back to the US, this discussion stimulated huge discussion around the federal and the state systems there and the amount of replication. It should stimulate huge discussion here in the UK, and it will stimulate huge discussion across Europe because it's not just the UK and America that have budget deficits, it's other countries. And in the next 10 years, it's potentially an area where there are huge advances to be made in terms of cost takeout and efficiency.
And in terms of multifunctional services, then, what are you saying? Is it that the private sector is going to have to, the public sector is going to have to start hiving that off?
I think they're starting way behind. I think there may be patches where there's some areas of public sector, in particular in the UK, where they've made advancements and they're ready for that discussion. I think in many areas, and many parts of local and federal government, they're not even ready for that because they haven't even moved to shared services, let alone even thought about consolidation of process. You get certain counties in the UK, for example, who will have probably 20 administrative officers within a 10-mile radius, right, of people doing the same kind of work. They're starting, most public sector organisations, whether it's local or government or major government level, are starting way back. So I'm not sure, and again, I don't know whether I'm being controversial or not, but it says I'm not sure most of the agencies are ready for that discussion around multifunctional service centres because they're starting so far back.
One point I would make, though, is that because public sector, it tends to all be within country, you're not talking about cross-border, multifunctional shared services is actually easier. Because as soon as you have 25, 30 countries handling all the local statutory differences within finance and HR makes shared services complex by definition, languages, technology and everything. But within public sector, it's just UK or just France or just Germany, a lot easier. I think the big question mark is outsourcing and offshoring, because there you're looking at significant headcount reduction and you're looking at firing people, and effectively if they're not going to be rehired very quickly, then it's still a cost to the economy. So
and also politically these things can be very unpopular.
Absolutely.
In the public
so it's
sector.
Political issues that are holding it up. But multifunctional shared services make sense for the public sector, even more than private sector.
Yeah, and from practical reasons, because when you have that intransparency that you were referring to, how are you going to split it? I mean, even if you decided you wanted to split it, you're not going to find the scope in there that you actually want to take out and build a captive center, or you're going to want to outsource. So it just makes sense from a practical point of view to do that.
Okay. Because we're under a bit of a time constraint, I'm just going to move on to our next question. I'm going to press this click. I don't know if it's going to do anything, but I'll press it anyway.
Still hasn't.
Who knows? But, maybe this one's, I don't know, exactly.
Someone will bring some tea.
Someone brings some, or gin and tonic might be nice. That would be nice. That's rather distracted me now. A question of outsourcing and automation strategy. So what we're looking at here is, in fact, we touched on, I think it might have been you. What level of maturity has the SSO BPO market now reached? Is it here to stay? And if so, can even further gains be realised from this service delivery model, or will something else replace it in the future? And then just to expand on that, which is the better strategy and why? Invest in IT or cheap labour? Will technology ever replace outsourcing? So I think really what we're talking about is the maturity of the business here. Who wants to kick off with that?
I'll give you a simple example to explain why. Let's start with the outsourcing piece first, because I think those are two different pieces. If you look at how much of the cost of some function, take finance function as an example, today is make, and how much is buy. So today, an average company produces 90% of what they have in their budget themselves and buys 10. So 10% is buy. However, in the finance budget, 50% of that cost is transactional cost. So if we look at only the transactional piece of finance, which I guess we all agree that the BPOs can do, they can quadruple to just cover that piece. So like Karina's already getting excited, right? But that 25 billion or 30 billion, however you define that market, should quadruple just covering that piece. So from that point of view, from an outlook point of view, I think if you're in BPO, it's probably a great place to be. The question.
But if the proposition is so blindingly obvious, it does make me wonder if we, as a service community, irrespective of captive or not, are being a bit lazy. You know, have we just done labour arbitrage because it's a piece of cake? You know, build a centre somewhere, hire some people, bang, off you go. Or, and yes, we have. I think we've got very entrepreneurial technology companies pushing stuff at us. You know, so that we keep thinking about it. But in a way, I think the speaker this morning, René, he sort of provoked us a little bit to talk about, are we providers or players? You know, and I do wonder whether we're missing a trick. Because really, a lot of what we do should be completely automated. I mean, why is P2P, why does it have people processing anything?
But really, I think you were telling me earlier on, weren't you, that shared services, 80% of the cost is labour.
It is.
So, which implies that technology's clearly got a bit of a way to go.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking that, you know, if you've got labour costs that are so low, and basically everything's done on a business case basis, and your technology cost has got a capital spike, then obviously it takes a lot of umming and ahhing as to whether you're actually going to go and invest. And I think it's stuff like that that's been the barriers to us transforming what currently is 80% of our cost is labour should really be 30% of our cost. Should we have 70% of our cost technology, and in total that cost is only 50% of what it is today.
But you say it's blindingly obvious, which is true. But the reason you've still got people involved in the P2P process is that further down the line there isn't the discipline to follow the processes. And so it becomes a change management or a cultural issue. I think the other point is you can spend all the money you want on Oracle and SAP, but people still aren't maximising the functionality. Yeah. And yes, there are lots of...
What, you mean they're not exploiting, they're not using it?
That's right. They may use 30, 40, 50, 60% of what it's capable of. And yes, it's good that we've got innovative software companies developing new technologies, but I think if we looked at what we got and enforced discipline, we could move a lot further down the line.
I mean, obviously being the side of the IT players here, probably Peter would agree with me, we would love to have people investing more in IT automation. That's what we do. And however, there's still a lot that can be gained in terms of better automation. Better automation. Still, we're very far away from having reached maturity there in terms of being able to offer automation that reaches from the business processes all the way down to silicon, to the chips that these processes are running on. And clearly there's a tremendous amount of integration and system kind of view that can really help here.
Labor is only the starting point normally. Yeah? So that's, I think the initial case is the labor piece, and that's convincing the C-level guys. And then you come with the standardization and the automation, the transparency, the virtualization, and then you really harvest on a shared, and the change management piece as well, from putting labor somewhere else. I think that's an extremely important piece, how to move on with a shared service organizational and environment.
I would assume in my ignorance, though, that obviously this, as we discussed, this is not my world, clearly in the way that it is yours, but I assume that there can be no limit to where automation is going to take you. And surely, when you're talking about 80% cost being labour, that's got to diminish, hasn't it? I mean, in terms of the maturity of the market, surely it's got to have further to go.
It's not an either-or question. There's no doubt. You can't say, well, we'll go down the automation route or we'll go down the offshore route to get labour. You need both. My view...
It was just a question of balance.
Absolutely. It's more a question of the order and the timing. I mean, my view is that when you're looking at support service transformation or back office transformation, you've got 8 levers to play with. You've got eliminate, simplify, automate, standardise, consolidate, offshore, outsource where it makes sense, and set up a continuous improvement capability.
Oh my God, I'm never going to remember all that. We are going to test you on that afterwards.
Right. But automation and offshoring to get labour arbitrage are 2 of those 8 levers. It's not a question of whether you go for these 2 or these 3. You've got to go for all of them. You need all 8 eventually. It's a question of what order. But the interesting question is if you've got right now a mess and it's onshore, so it's high cost and it's not very standardised, it's not very automated. The interesting question is, do you fix it and then move offshore? Do you move offshore and then fix it? Or do you try and fix it as you move offshore? That's the question.
And that's a religious question, more or less, because it's completely different approaches. Yeah? So we had, for instance, this 80-20 approach, where we said, okay, if you fix it a little bit, and then we move everything in the shared service center, and once you have it and you have the critical size, then you move on with, because you can focus IT investment and automation and all this stuff to be done.
But there's no right or wrong answer.
No, there is no.
But I mean, if the question is, will technology ever replace outsourcing? Presumably the answer has to be
I don't understand the question. Right?
No,
because I don't think it's... sorry, guys, I don't think it's actually a relevant question, because I don't think technology will replace outsourcing, because you could say, will it replace insourcing? Right? As Peter said, it's a complete balance of make-up right the way across the processes. I think the word maturity is interesting, because we lose sight of this business, right? We lose sight of the compression of time. And I remember when IBM started this business up in, when was it, 2002. So 2002, 2003, you would struggle to persuade a chief financial officer to go to Poland to see our finance centre there. Right? They wouldn't want to go. They didn't believe they could do finance in Poland. Right? The chance of you getting a CFO to go to Bangalore then was also really, really low. Right? Whereas now, most of us here who've got our centres around the world, we've almost got Disney-like visitor experience to get all the executives through the door because they want to go rush to see it. We lose sight of the fact that in 7-8 years, the business has gone from hardly anything to this business that's grown. And then I look at it in terms of maturity of process. You take one of these glasses, the amount of processes that are currently shared service or outsourced probably would fit in that glass versus the opportunity which is the size of this room. So you can argue that the business has matured very quickly. I would argue that most of the providers, most people in shared service environment have got tremendous experience, but they've got a long, long way to go, potentially in every company. And I think there's one more point I'd make to that. The 2 words that have been thrown around, and I just want to couple them together, are around compliance and governance. And the thing that drives most of us nuts is whenever you go into a company, they can put in process standardization, you can put in the technology. It's just not used effectively. And the number of companies you go to that don't even have a procurement compliance. So people are still buying outside of their procurement governance process. There's still some really simple things that can be done, utilising the existing technology. So I actually think, from a shared service environment and from an onshore, offshore, in-source, outsource, there's still a tremendous way to go. Tremendous way to go.
Well, if that's where you are in terms of maturity of SSO BPO market, what about when part of the question is related to technology? Are there issues with technology that have kind of frightened people off? We were talking earlier about process utility model technology, and this was, I think, what people thought was the thing of the future, and then actually rather frighten people off. I mean, what's the view on that?
Probably one of the reasons why the automation levels are only at 20 to 40% currently.
Because I have to say that did surprise me when I was, obviously you will know this better than I, but when I was genning up on this subject, it did surprise me. I had kind of the vision that the thing was automated up to its ears, and it is relative to a lot of industries, but even so, there's still a long way to go.
Because you have that issue, we're in Europe here, right? So, every country that you want to roll in, the first issue you get is, can I move this data? Are these people in Poland able, or should they see that? Are they allowed to work with it? So you have all these issues, of course, and that's...
What you mean in terms of security and privacy?
Yes, data privacy laws.
I think the other thing is, though, is the way, and I think we are guilty sometimes of trying to deliver requests, so whether our internal stakeholders request things of us. And by doing that, most of the requests are around efficiency. Right? So the requests are, let's cut the cost. So the technology innovation has been around doing that. I think if they were more about questions around value, how can I stop, as I spoke about yesterday on the order to cash side, how can I get my cash in faster? How can I stop my order book leaking by the time it gets to the point of cash? If we had those discussions and then said, how can I automate, what automation ideas should I have around that? Then very quickly the efficiency just comes as a byproduct. I'm thinking. Whereas we're sort of stuck in this, cut the cost of efficiency all the time. It's a very narrow little domain.
But that's exactly the discussion which is currently running, because I think the crisis provoked some questions regarding cash and whatever, and therefore I think you do much more invest in the IT environment on the order to cash and collection and all this stuff.
Using IT effectively and getting the best out of it, for me, really, as experience has shown that if you think about it, a lot of what we do is encapsulating best practices. Our solutions really encapsulate best practices.
Well, you would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, I guess
hang on, we weren't supposed to be doing an advertising up here.
It's the nature not just of Oracle, but software in general, of IT more broadly. And what really helps our customers a lot is when they minimize the amount of special development and unique adaptations and modifications to their solutions, and maximize the adoption of standard software.
But let's say that all the manufacturing industries in the world all used one utility, because really, invoicing is the same in manufacturing irrespective, right? You would earn a hell of a lot less money, right? And I'm being provocative, but I think, wouldn't that change the paradigm of the industry? Wouldn't that lead towards utility processing? And therefore we'd have to seek different revenues. It's kind of like how the internet boom started, isn't it? And I just don't think we're so stuck in today's finances that we're not pushing ourselves into that market.
I see still a tremendous potential in gathering more experience, encapsulating more best practices, and standardizing processes and cleaning those processes. Yeah. And I see that our most successful customers and ourselves really utilize that to the maximum degree in terms of minimizing the amount of unique differences to what the law requires, for example, or what language requires in a certain country, but forgetting all of the, non-mission critical changes.
I think, Karina's put a thing on it in terms of, but I think it's a phasing thing, that most people haven't gone beyond the phase of sorting out transaction processing. I mean, I say to people who are building shared service centres, your first job is to build it, the second job is to get rid of it. Because really, if a shared service centre is doing transaction processing, like purchase to pay, paying suppliers, matching invoices, that stuff should be done fully automated with no role at all from back office finance. If you do shared services right, you don't need people in it. Now, the only alternative to getting rid of it is moving up the value chain, moving from transactional to advisory. And I think that's what you're talking about, looking at the sort of outcomes-based pricing if you're an outsource provider. But people can't really get their handle on that until they've got the first bit. And the first bit is all about elimination, standardization, consolidation, and so forth.
In fact, it's very interesting because a very big part of the management, best practices around running this transformation has been just a line which is a way that people remember things. It's no more than that. But, obviously, Oracle has been on the path of a lot of changes. And one of the lines that we have adopted is we don't integrate, we eliminate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in terms of eliminating complexity and eliminating unnecessary parts of the process.
But also, it won't be eliminating parts of the process, it'll be effectively eliminating human beings from the payroll and I imagine there are going to be issues around there. I mean, I don't know if there's different to how Europe does it to how America does it, but I mean, I would have thought for companies that must be something they're going to have to grapple with.
The labour laws around the world are different, and again, the American labour market is different. It is fundamentally easier to take people out of an organisation. In parts of Europe, it is easier, and other parts of Europe, as we well know, it is harder. I think part of the discussion comes from often the appetite of a company to tackle the labour cost, and that really comes from the top. Because it is, in nearly every case, tackleable, if that's a word. It may take time, it may cost money, but it needs an appetite from the top to be able to take on employee groups, and then take people out. We had this discussion in the States as well about why do business cases fail. And we had this interesting discussion with Anoop from Accenture as well. He and I have seen this on numerous occasions, where it doesn't matter whether you have a shared service centre or you outsource it. You then don't take out the legacy organisation. It stays in place. So, and one of the questions there was, why do outsourcing deals fail through lack of business benefit? Well, most outsourcing deals are actually with a built-in pricing mechanism to ramp the price down The bit that often kills it is that the management team lose the will and the governance to make the tough decisions, name, rank, serial number of people they have to take out. It's the messy bit, but most organisations have to have that level of commitment to do it. And where you find both shared service centres failing and outsource deals failing, one of the most common factors is where management lose the will, or they lose the direction, or they lose the power to be able to make the changes that are left inside their own organisation to get that efficiency driven through. But it varies around the world as to how you manage your labour force. From several of us, again, who work for international companies, again, we see that in every country we operate. We just have to manage our business internationally and move work around to match the skills.
Peter, what's your view from the kind of advisory consultative perspective?
Just thinking through. In terms of automation, back to the original question, that's clearly a tool that every provider or internal shared service is going to use because it drives efficiencies, it improves quality, it reduces costs. So I think that's here to stay. Will it be the end of outsourcing? Personal view, I don't think so. For me, again, it comes back to the whole governance question and around if somebody within the organisation who has the mandate to direct that change. Because it's a tough old journey whether you go to a shared services internal centre or you outsource. There are some bumps on the road. And without that executive commitment, that's where you get the deals or the engagements that tend to flounder.
I do sometimes wonder, because we're all quite large organisations, we have, some cash to spend, we have, opportunities to finance things in certain ways. We have great tools that we can use to transform the industry. And I think if we work together on something, for example, maybe we could be a little bit bolder and leapfrog some of the steps. I think that we keep talking about, the evolution. I just wonder if maybe.
So what's holding you back?
This is my point. I think for some reason we're not having the conversations in an open enough way to be able to say, let's stop talking about efficiency. Because we're still talking about it. I've been in this industry 15 years, and we're still talking about the same thing.
But I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it as well, given what the government's
absolutely,
trying to do.
Which is the sad bit. So actually, we're now we've got deficits. Everybody's going to go back talking about it again, rather than saying, okay, let's go to a new paradigm. Could we use the money that we have, the new technology that we have, and the wealth of expertise that we have in the industry now to actually do something a bit more radical? How can we leapfrog? And for some reason, I just don't think we're having those conversations. And it's maybe because, we're not talking together in this sort of way as much, or our conversations with different market leaders and clients are always too contained within.
And what do you think those radical things might be? I mean, where are you?
Well, look at what's happened with the sort of Facebooks and the Googles and these sort of companies. When is the shared services Facebook going to come out? I don't have the answer. I just wish I did.
It's quite interesting.
I think it's there somehow. I can always touch it, but I don't know how to get there.
The disruptors in the next decade are going to be fundamental because, again, if you look at, and again from the side I run, which is the CRM side, and there's a lot of discussion around customer-enabled use of social media. So you can see that, if you take a huge call centre industry, it's never going to go away, but you can see customers now that are using Facebook, they're using MySpace, they're using Twitter, and they're collecting vast amounts of potential sales information. And some of the work that we end up seeing around the analytics of customer information in there, it's fundamental. The things that are going to really change, though, you look at the world now of 6 billion people, there are 4 billion mobile phones on the planet. Right? If you say by 2015 that moves up towards the 6 billion mobile phones, and let's assume those mobile phones then become mobile devices that work from the cloud, you take away all your apps, you have simple apps on there, there's a potential there to really change how we do things. You then look at some of the other scary things, like Skype can be a tremendous disruptor because Skype have 500 million registered users. Right, that's a model where you have free telco between fixed line to fixed line.
Yes,
How disruptive is that?
Can you imagine if you have P2P Facebook with Skype?
Exactly.
Where are we
So
going? It's kind of new shared services.
The next decade is going to change things into that mobile era. However, I guess we'll be sitting here looking slightly older in 10 years' time, reflecting on the fact that not everyone's embraced it.
Peter, do you want to come in there?
I'm not sure that. I mean, these are all great visionary ideas, but I'm not sure why we're going so far when the situation currently is that. I mean, the reality is, in our methodology, which you all know, a company we call world class, so the best ones, only utilize half of the existing best ideas. Only half. So we're comparing companies, that utilize a quarter versus a half of existing knowledge. So I'm not quite on the same trip yet in increasing mobile phones to 2 billion, because nothing will change in terms of utilizing the phones or the process until we actually do the work. So it comes back to your original question, why isn't the automation up from 20 to 40% to something more? And of course, I'm looking at the BPOs, of course, because they need to be better at this. Why would I otherwise go to them and ask them to do the job? So I think we should just get down and do the work instead of dreaming about some visionary stuff.
All right. Karina's being a visionary. That's what she's doing.
That's what he said. It's about discipline to push these things through and to use them. And to do the change management, because this is always the big thing. Because you would easily say, why don't you use it? Yeah? But it's a huge endeavor to change a company that they are using standards, that they give up their toys and all this stuff. So and that's the reason why we are so lagging in implementing this stuff.
Well, talking about change management, and let's move on to our final question, which is basically about shoring options and labour arbitrage. And the question that you have amalgamated together is, does it still make sense to locate in low-cost countries when their labour costs will soon increase and wage arbitrage will disappear? I mean, that's an assumption clearly in that question. Are we in danger of needing to constantly move activities around in search of a better price? If I say Peter, I know that's going to be at least one of you over there, but exactly, that's right. It's just not Peter over there. Good chance someone's going to answer. Peter, at the end.
Yeah, okay. Can you just repeat the question? Because I've actually got a different question in front of me, Fiona.
Well, let's go with this one.
Let's go with this one. Can you repeat it? Sorry.
Does it make sense? We're talking about labour arbitrage.
Yeah.
Does it basically? Are you into the law of diminishing returns there? Is there a sense, effectively, you're going to be chasing around the world, eternally searching for lower cost labour, which eventually is going to disappear? Is that the way to go?
I think offshoring is here to stay and will continue to move around. I think companies like sort of Bill's and mine and members on the panel have sort of global networks of service centres. It actually enables us to sort of arbitrage the processes, despite any political decisions where we're delivering services. I think it's here to stay.
It's an important piece of the change management, as you said in the beginning, to have a greenfield, a different location. Because if you have a shared service center near your headquarters or whatever, then you're lost more or less, because you will not standardize, you will not change something. Therefore, the first piece, and you had all these 8 levers, I guess, is a location decision is very crucial, and not to have it at your home turf. Have it somewhere else on a greenfield, start all over. And then
why is that important?
It's important because of the change. The nature is, if you say, okay, this is now my headquarter finance department is shared service, and say, okay, fine, okay, and then they still continue to work. There is no change in.
So you physically have to go.
You have to physically somewhere to go and ring the bell for that. We are now changing the company. It's a lot of change.
So that's in terms of change management rather than lowering costs and labour arbitrage.
Exactly. The lowering cost is the second piece of the business case. It's the most convincing piece of the business case in the beginning, because the others don't realize that standardization, automation, and all these other stuff bring much more value later on. But the first piece is the labour arbitrage, and this will stay.
Yeah, I think the other point is that the reason people go to new locations, it's partly cost, but it's primarily availability of labour and availability of good quality labour. And if we're seeing, you said, well, this could be the golden age for outsourcing in the next 10 years. We're going to need more people, and therefore we're going to have to go to new locations. We don't see companies leaving. We don't see companies leaving Budapest. We see maybe they're transferring roles from Budapest, but we don't see them leaving. I think the interesting point would come if the overall outsourcing market became static and you weren't adding new roles into the global outsourcing community, and then there would be competition between existing locations. But now the incremental jobs maybe going to new locations because of the labour arbitrage. But you've got new roles coming into the existing locations.
Just looking at the maths for a second here. If the UK, let's say, labour rates for processing clerks are, let's say in India, they're 80% less, which may be about right. And let's say the UK rate's growing 5% a year, and the Indian rate's growing 15% a year, which again, may be right. A lot of people look at that 15% a year and think, whoa, the arbitrage will be gone in a few years. In 10 years, it will still be half the cost in India if those apply. The 80% now, the 5%
Because
UK,
they'll be moving like
because
that.
you've got a small amount growing at a large 15% amount, but the small amount takes ages to get up to the large amount. So the labour arbitrage, people think 15%, 20% increase in Philippines, India, it's not sustainable. Well, after 10 years, there'll still be 50% labour arbitrage. So my view is it's here for 10 years, possibly 15, possibly 20. The other thing, though, is, as you say, the talent pool in India, for example, 2.5 million English-speaking graduates every year. And the university system out there, the education system, and you were making this point earlier on, Bill, excellent point, is more geared towards producing the kind of graduates needed. You had an interesting story about China.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was going to build on that because I was going to change the question, does it still make sense to locate in high-skill countries? Because that's the key thing, is the development of skills. And, you know, throwing stats on the table, there will be more finance graduates in India this year than in the whole of the US and Europe put together.
Wow.
So many of us, even if you wanted to put, you know, specialist finance centres in the UK, you wouldn't get the skills. Right? And that's a genuine problem. And I did mention China, I also mentioned Egypt as well, where we were talking about this earlier, the pace of change where developing governments or governments of developing countries are able to change their educational curriculum in the universities to prepare students to come out to pick up work and be work ready. And it's one of the things that we haven't got time to wind me up completely about the demise of the British educational system, where we're actually producing graduates, and I know it's common across half of Europe, if not more, and certainly it wound the American audience up, but we're producing graduates that aren't work ready. And so therefore what you're finding is you're going to other parts of the world where governments are more ready to change the education system, they're more ready to get their graduates work ready, and they're more ready to make the environment better for you to be able to ship work in. So it's not just a cost issue, although cost is clearly important. No one's going to turn down the chance to operate at 50% less. Well, some companies do, and I still find that odd. But it's also really the issue is around going to the right skills. And as you look at the planet, if you look at as we are truly global, right? And the point I made about the 6 billion mobile phones is a reality. You look at some of the areas in South America that are developing, the Middle East, the untapped continent of Africa. There's still tremendous skills, and as we develop that, work will continue to move around. So I'm completely in agreement. This labour arbitrage thing, is it dead? No, it isn't. Does it mean we're going to have to move around? Yes, we are. But I don't think, again, 10 years' time when we're old and crinkly, we'll be sitting here saying that labour arbitrage is over. I think what we will be discussing is where we've all moved to find the right skills at the right price point.
If we turn the question on its head then, does it ever make sense to locate in the UK or in European countries that aren't low cost and high
Yes,
skilled?
it does. And can I just pick this one up?
When would it then?
Yeah, I think if we also look at the motor industry or some of the other industries in the world and look at how, for example, the Koreans and the Japanese have really attacked Western automotive companies and how they've responded. I think it's a natural instinct to then say, okay, if you're under attack, you either defend or you go round, and you actually think about new talents and new skills. And I think the minister in Scotland said the same thing. Scotland, for example, thinks of itself as a destination for shared services, and I think absolutely it is. But it needs to think about, okay, what's my value proposition? Right. If I've got a higher base price point, I've obviously got to be something else. So maybe I'm in R&D, or maybe I'm in something that...
It's interesting to look, for example, when shared services started in Europe, it was really early 90s, 93, 94, 95. Dublin was one of the hot sites. From about 95 to 1999, Dublin was the site where organisations were going. After about 2001, 2002, suddenly everyone realised actually you could move to Eastern Europe. It could be Prague, it could be Budapest, it could be Poland, and you could offshore stuff that didn't require languages. Now Dublin in the last 10 years has basically been reinventing itself as a sort of centre of excellence location. The shared service centres that did transaction processing, they don't make sense. The people have been moved to Bucharest or Romania or wherever. what's happened is that those shared service centres have moved up the value chain, have done more sort of controlling work, more advisory work, so they can find their niche, but they need to move up the value chain.
But they aren't doing enough of that, right? We heard it today. They're still selling multiple languages. They're still selling what are really some fundamentals. So I don't think they've really quite got to the stage where they're selling real value propositions that are in the skill set, in the high skill area. Just saying you have languages, well, everybody in Eastern Europe has languages. So even though I'm from Aberdeen, I'm sorry, I don't think Scotland's got it yet. They have to build something that's more compelling.
There's another scary disruptive technology that we ignore, and I probably 2 years ago, I thought it was about 20 to 25 years off, which was interactive voice translation. And again, for those of you who are Star Trek fans, if you go get the first episode of Star Trek out, 1967, nearly all the disruptive technologies that we've experienced in our lives in the future are in there. Gene Roddenberry was a true visionary, right? So, Kirk talks to Klingon in American English, and he hears it in Klingon.
Need we say more?
And he talks back in Klingonese, and it comes back in American English, right?
I know, it's brilliant.
So it's a disruptive technology that I suspect is now probably only 5 to 10 years away. From most of the research work that we see,
the new Oracle.
but it will take away the discussion on language, potentially, right? So the discussion we're having about
computerized simultaneous translation.
You will talk down the phone in English to someone in China, and
then will it sound like Stephen Hawking is then talking to the person? Now you see, I don't like the sound of that.
You got it. But that technology has the potential to completely disrupt this entire discussion. Because it takes the language discussion out.
Well, language is a dimension, and cost is the other very fundamental dimension. But these are not the only two dimensions. There is another aspect which I believe is very, very important. It is that by now we all expect 24/7. We all expect instant response. We all expect real-time response, and that really means follow the sun. It means multiple locations. It really means, for example, there is an earthquake. Yeah, there was one in Chile in March, right? So, companies might be depending on a center in Chile, and you might experience a disruption. And most of us have service level agreements that really talk about minutes of downtime per month. So that really means you have to think about backup systems. You have to think about alternative ways of doing things in real time. And so having this global approach of not just putting all of your eggs in one basket, but being able to distribute your risk around the globe is very important.
The outsource providers have an advantage here because, you guys around this in this room right now, you have, 15, 25, 30 delivery centres around the world, and you can hedge your bets and cover the various options. You'll have Latin America, you'll have Asia, you'll have Eastern Europe, and so forth. If you're a captive and you're trying to work out where the hell to put your shared service centres, if you're doing it on a global basis, you probably
don't
need...
Or you're a small company, obviously.
Well, you need maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. Shell, I talked about 5 or 6. They're a massive organisation. Each of them are 1,000 people in the shared service centres. But you've really got to think about where are the 3 or 4 sites. And if those sites, within 5 years, do what Dublin did, suddenly the business case doesn't look so good. So it's much more difficult for a captive.
You're absolutely right, but you know what the sad thing is? And I know I'm admitting something I probably shouldn't admit. 90% of our contracts don't allow us the flexibility to use our global centres in exactly that way.
Why not?
Because our clients have got too scared. They've said, no, you can only use these centres because I've physically been there, I've physically given it a tick in the box. Therefore, if you want to move from there into another city, no, I have to see it first and I have to prove it. So we're like a pseudo captive.
Maybe they think it doesn't really exist.
Well, even if it doesn't exist today, so what? We will only build something that makes sense because we have so many liabilities if we don't. So it's a little paradigm shift, but why not? So increasingly with the recession, we've had the opportunity to have that conversation, and people have got more comfortable. But for goodness sake, just let us put the work in all our centres because they're all the same, and then we'll guarantee inflation risk, etc., etc. But we're not going to do it if you're going to push us to keep our work in the centres that you like.
Well, let me. I think we could. No. We keep talking about this for some time, but I know I also need to throw the floor open to you because part of this is a question and answer session for you. not just a lovely conversation between ourselves. So I don't know if you're able to put the house lights, that might help, because otherwise I can't see a thing really. But if you've got, oh, fantastic, there you are. How nice. It's kind of lonely up here when you can't see the audience. But if you've got a question you want to put to the panel, we have got microphones around, so stick your hand up. I'm a bit short-sighted, so if I don't see it, you're going to have to help me out here. I should have brought my specs. So who would like to put a question to our panel? There. That brave person over there is the first to go. Good for you.
Thank you.
And do you want to say where you're from as well?
Yeah, I'm Dirk Mulder. I'm here from Scotland, although I'm Dutch, and I work for Sun Microsysters. One of the questions I had was 10, 15, 20 years ago, if we were to have this conference here, we would probably have a room full of, I don't know, hauliers, external manufacturers, and all sorts of companies that were doing outsourcing at that time. Now we're talking back office type companies that are organizing shared services, other back office type activities. Where do we go in 10, 15 years' time? Are we outsourcing other functions in companies, more critical functions? Is it sales? Is it IP? Is it R&D? That's kind of what I want to throw out there.
Okay. Who'd like to... Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think that comes back to my glass and building point. And I think if you go back probably 5 years, remember the McKinsey model of what's core and non-core? I think that model's moving to what are we good at and what are we bad at, and how do we leverage other people's experience. I actually think we've barely scratched the surface of some of the processes that can be either shared serviced or outsourced. I really think we barely touched the surface. And I think if we take into account, utilising technology more efficiently, often we don't need the Oracle and SAP guys to build any more functionality. We just need to work out how to use what's in there. Right? So if we throw automation in and then we start looking at some of the processes across the enterprise, I think we've barely touched the surface of what can be moved around in a global environment.
So it's going up the hill from the value chain on the one side. On the other side, I think the outsourcing piece or the actual work, I think this will get Facebook somehow, because at a certain degree, it doesn't matter whether one person sits in Siberia or in Kazakhstan or in the highlands or whatever. Even he has to have access to a system, and he can work from there and work down his transactional stuff. And so on the one side, you have shared service centers where we're getting up the hill, but the other stuff is getting kind of virtualized somewhere.
I think an interesting way of looking at it is ask the question, if you were to build an organization from scratch in Europe today, what would you need to have in every single country? You'd say, well, maybe we need someone from a sales perspective to actually go and press the flesh and meet customers and so forth. Beyond that, do you actually need anything in each country? In terms of R&D, in terms of design, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of finance, HR, support, there's not that much you actually need in every country. If you looked at it that way and started from scratch, you could build a completely different organisation. The second question is, what do we need to do ourselves in-house and what could we outsource? And you look at some organisations, look at Virgin, a lot of their businesses, they don't actually do much of the operations at all. They just have the brand and maybe the customer interaction. So I think there's some fundamental questions you can ask, which means that the organisation of tomorrow could be very different. And the issue isn't what could it look like, it's how the hell do you get there from where you are now.
A lot of new organizations do that. Take, this energy drink, Red Bull. They make billions, and they've got a few hundred employees because everything is outsourced. So they do exactly what Peter said. At the end, it's just about which piece of knowledge is critical to your success, and you want to keep it in-house. It's not really about the ability or the capability of the market to service these needs.
You can scale down and up much better. Yeah. I think I've seen it with a gas company in Germany. So have 5 or 6 people. The rest is outsourced and having billions of money moving around. Yeah.
And a very key component is not just the economy of scale and the economy of place. We're talking about locations, but also the enabling technologies. And I think, going forward to the question, the cloud is going to be enabling many of these things. In terms of really providing the scalability, the flexibility of going up and down, and the location independency that we need to achieve that kind of a vision. And even coming closer to us, cloud computing is becoming reality. I mean, in public sector in the UK, for example, there is very significant initiatives around cloud computing. So these are becoming real. I like Facebook a lot, but in terms of what companies can use today, cloud computing is becoming a very big part of reality.
think it got chopped yesterday.
What got chopped yesterday?
The Cloud Computing Initiative.
Oh, did it?
I don't know.
Yet another thing to be cut. And there'll be more. Have we got another question from the floor? Back there, and then the lady here in the red.
Thank you. My name is Aubrey Joachim, and I'm from SEMA. Very interesting hearing the discussion about resources around the world and things like labor arbitrage and all of that. I think at a point in time, the labor arbitrage issue will disappear and organizations will compete on competencies. Now, what I'm seeing is that a lot of shared service centers and BPO service providers are loath to spend on training their people in gaining those high-level competencies, right? So they still stick to the basics. And in most instances, even if you get high-quality graduates coming out of university, where are the people who have had the practical experience and that out-of-the-box thinking in order to even change or transform BPOs? That is a challenge, I think, and until that happens, we are still going to be talking the same thing 5-10 years from now without being bold enough to transform.
Yeah.
Actually, Mark, you were nodding there. I saw you.
Well, I think training is important, because you're right in that locations will be competing on competence rather than cost. I think training is important for a number of reasons. First, as you say, to increase the competence levels once people have started work, but also as a means of retention. What makes the shared service centres in India and Central and Eastern Europe different from the ones, say, in the UK, is that 90% of the people working there are graduates. And you are going to have to further development, help them to grow. And if it can't always be through promotion, then at least you're helping them to build their skill set and make them more marketable in the future. And then you'll keep them for longer. So yes, it is a valid point.
Karina, before you said it, can we just bring the mic down here for the lady in the red, and then we'll be able to go straight to our next question. Yeah, Karina.
I just wanted to share something. In our business, in the last 2 years, we've probably grown the soft skills competencies and the curriculum around soft skills by about 20% more than we have the traditional skills. So initially, we used to focus on things like numeracy, project management, these sorts of things. Whereas now we're talking about negotiation skills. Cultural empathy, being able to talk on the phone with some empathy, etc., etc. So much more of our competency development work is actually focused on, if you like, supporting value-added services. And I think that will lead to less emphasis on labour arbitrage just for basic competencies, and level out the arbitrage question more, because we're starting to focus on things that if you like, centres of expertise are being created around. So I think it's a very good point, and I think the more people invest in competencies rather than basic things like accounts payable processing, the cleverer our industry will become.
Can we actually, because we've got a few, I'll come to you. Yes.
Kate Patasic with the University of Tennessee. First, an observation: y'all are all the big dogs in your world, and I'm curious to see how you're going to avoid the innovator's dilemma. So the question is, to anyone who's read Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, how do you not get Facebooked out of your own industry?
Who would like to take that? Can I just say, I have not read this marvellous tome, whatever it is.
I haven't read it, but I'd suggest we have to embrace it. And have to learn how to use it. So I've not read the book either. But if you're saying how do we move ahead? How do you not get Facebooked out your own industry? There's a real danger. I think disruptors come along and change the way we operate. Right?
What is also very bizarre is that 70% of our staff are under the age of 27. Yeah. Right? So in all of our industry, who have grown up with that and who use that as a sort of de facto way of communicating, whereas the rest of the organisation is actually the managerial and sort of movers and shakers in the industry, which is almost back to front. So I kind of remember the dot-com bubble when it first started. I remember leaving my safe job and doing something mad. And I think we're really almost at that phase now where we've maybe got to ask our 25-year-olds to come and do our job and really see what they come up with. Do they actually come up with something different?
Yeah, we have access to the younger generation, and therefore, as long as we're flexible, we can adapt and survive. I mean, I think the other point is, we sell brain power. Most of us here. It's very difficult, though, to build a global network from scratch, and that's our protection. The barriers to entry of setting up a global network are what protects us, as long as we remain flexible and we listen to our younger generation.
I mean, what I see is that the BPO market really in Europe's only been around really since 2002 to 2003. I mean, yes, it started in 1991 with BP outsourcing, but very little happened for 10 years. So it's only been around 6, 7, 8 years. Very, very fast pace of change. Lots of disruption within that time. Shared services have been around since the early 90s, almost 20 years. Much slower pace of change. I think the challenge is for captives to be able to compete with the outsource providers who are growing and learning very, very quickly. It's survival of the fittest out there. An outsource provider every week or every 2 weeks will have someone coming and spending a day looking at every single aspect of their business and really kicking the tires. Captives don't have that pressure. So survival of the fittest suggests that the outsource providers will learn and continue to learn very, very quickly. The challenge is for the captives to justify their existence if they're not learning, evolving, being as productive, adding value as quickly.
I love this idea of captives and survival of the fittest. Sounds like there's some sort of mad jungle out there.
It is a jungle.
Tied to stakes and the rest of it. There was a question, actually, as you said, but there was a question also further to the back, I thought, which I didn't see. If not, you sir at the front. Can we get a microphone to this gentleman here?
Okay, I'm Umberto Larizza from Unicredit Group. So just, how can we say, maybe it's a challenge more than a question. So you represent the most important, some of the most important opinion leaders related to IT and solution. In your laboratory, do you have ready or do you have enough clear what kind of solution you can provide to us for the next future in terms of IT, in terms of organization or process redesign, some new asset? Maybe it's just a session of scenario, but to be more pragmatic, what kind of solution you can provide us, you can advise us for the next future for the short service center? Is a question for the most opinion leader. Starting from SAP, maybe.
That's a very generic. Very generic.
Well, don't forget he's not allowed to advertise. That's going to be a bit tricky.
We don't advertise.
Right. You know better than me that we are in SAP.
Principle. We're talking about the big themes.
Principles. You can visit our shared service center and look what we are using. So, and I think that's what we are providing to our customers as well. But
it's also a way of saying, where are the issues, where are the problems, where are the opportunities, presumably, for the future and for your business? Yeah,
the opportunities are in the automation of the P2P, or all this crap stuff, which has to go away in a certain sense, because you have to push it down into the automation. You have to get more into the order-to-cash piece and create more transparency in these areas, make it more virtual so that you can work from whatever end and whatever shared service center around the world on one order. So it's transparency, it's automation, electrification more or less of everything. But the key is, I think, the transparency, so that you have your production process much more under control and see where you are at what stage, and can intervene much easier from your kind of cockpit piece.
Let me answer your question in sort of more general terms. I don't think the problem is that these people don't have the solution. I guess the problem is more to ask, do you know whether you're ready to go and what do you actually want? That's often sort of more the issue that I see. I mean, they've got the technology, all the best practices that we discuss, if you want to, they all exist, they're all known. It's not like every week there's one more invented. So I think there's quite a lot of knowledge out there in the landscape, and, like you mentioned, you sell brains or capability, so there's a lot of that available, and these people run successful organizations that do these things. So obviously we also engage with clients a few hundred times per year, and often the problem is, you will know from your organization, more the internal process to get to the point where we, you, us, whoever you're dealing with, agree on what it is that makes sense to do. So I think in shared services, the biggest problem really is to sort of come together and find a solution that can politically and be accepted by everybody. Find a compromise which is not on the lowest level, because then it doesn't make sense. So that's in my view, the biggest issue.
Okay. Anyone else? Or we're going to leave it to the techie boys. Any?
Well, if Peter talks, I cannot. Plus, it's an Italian asking, so it's 2 years. No, I mean, clearly, we won't stand still. That's clear. There is a lot going on, and particularly if you look at one of the biggest costs is bringing things together. Is the complexity of integrating things together. If you look at vision where you could take the existing functional modules and make them part of a single global infrastructure, software infrastructure, that is a big vision, and it's something that, of course, companies are working on, including ours, right? And that can potentially be a great benefit to most of our organizations. So, integration.
I'm afraid we have run out of time, actually. I expect there are more questions. I'm terribly sorry we haven't got time to answer them. Thank you for the questions you put, and thank you not only for the questions now in our Q&A, but also for the 3 questions you put that you voted for. I hope you found the answers that our panel have provided satisfactory, not too flaunting of their own company's prowesses. I have to say, I have learned a lot sitting here, and I'm thankful to you all. This has been a relatively acronym-free session, for which I'm wholeheartedly grateful. I must have got slightly lost. But thank you for your questions and for taking part, and to our panel. Thank you very much indeed.